Kia ora, I'm Sharon Brett Kelly. Today on The Detail, the children leading invisible lives in New Zealand.
Harry was born in New Zealand, but unlike many other Kiwi teenagers, he's never been to school, doesn't have a bank account, a driver's license, or even a passport.
That is the reality facing a rising number of undocumented young people who were born after 2006 citizenship law change.
Stateless, without a country, without a place to call home, despite the fact that New Zealand is the only home they've known.
And why there could be thousands more like them.
Every year now we're going to be having more and more of these children are going to be coming out of high school and realising that they can't go for tertiary study, they can't go and get jobs because it would be a breach of the law for employers to employ someone who's here unlawfully. So they can't work, they can't study, they can't travel, they just simply cannot do anything.
We'll hear about the law change that was rushed through 19 years ago that has created these stateless children. But first, the brave young man who first went public with his story 2 years ago. Here's RNZ's immigration reporter Jill Bonnet.
The reason why this came to light initially was a story by my colleague Blesson Tom in the RNZ Asia unit. He was approached by a 17-year-old boy who had been here all his life but discovered that he was not a New Zealand citizen.
Most teenagers born in New Zealand grow up dreaming of a bright future. However, a 17-year-old teenager we're calling Dhruv tells a different story.
His parents had overstayed their visa. His sister, who was older, hadn't been affected by this law because she was born before it came in. He was born in 2006 and therefore he'd been able to go through school okay, but when it came to thinking about university or work, he realised that, he'd got nowhere to go. He said,
"Kids my age have dreams, but I don't even have the right to."
That boy was, in fact, Damon Kumar, although he was speaking anonymously back then in 2023. And he explained the situation in terms of what are his options.
It's not fair. Even if you do want to be honest about it and tell someone, you can't. And if you do, you're probably going to regret it.
And of course, then he eventually went through various appeals and he was on the brink of getting a deportation order.
His time is officially up. If he doesn't leave New Zealand today, he will face a deportation order.
When the Associate Immigration Minister granted him residence.
Minister Chris Pink yesterday granted residency to the 18-year-old. His parents were not offered the same amnesty, however, and still faced deportation.
His parents had never had residence or citizenship here. That's still the other part of it. I believe that they are still appealing their cases to be able to stay here with him and his sister.
They're overstayers.
Yes, I think their lawyer, Alistair McClymont, says that you shouldn't be visiting the sins of the parents on the children. But of course, the children, if and when they do get their residence, they will still potentially be separated from their parents, so they swap one problem for another. They're no longer worried about being citizens here and they can, have a life here, but potentially, yes, not with their parents. There have been a few cases come out since his case. There was a boy who was talking about, he's 18 years old now, so I don't know if we can describe him as a boy, but he has been brought up by his mother. They were living in hiding. She was so fearful of being found that he didn't go to school, hadn't been to a doctor since he was 7.
What would happen if Mum had to go home and you got to stay? Have you thought about that?
That's really tough as well, because she was the only person I've been together with in 18 years. That's basically, ruining my life in another way as well.
So, he obviously doesn't want to be separated from somebody who he's spent his whole life with, and the fear that must go on in bringing that to authorities' attention effectively by saying, in my own case, I need to appeal this so that I can have a life here, but worrying that you might be putting your parents in danger of being deported as well.
So that child in particular must have had a birth certificate when he was born.
You say that, but no, it's my memory of having children that you as a parent applies to internal affairs and to get a birth certificate, and it's you that fills out all those details. So it is feasible that these
didn't even have that.
Some of these children don't even have a birth certificate.
No birth certificate. And so that means that they can't Enroll in school?
School's different. There were a few cases in the 2000s, I think, where children weren't going to school and everybody realised that that was in nobody's best interest, even if the parents were overstayers. So it became law that you didn't have to produce a visa or proof of citizenship to go to school. I think that goes till the age of 16, but I'm not sure how much schools actually then carry on checking for, hopefully they can carry on until they're 18. The problem is that 18, if you're not a resident or a citizen, you can't get domestic fees for university, and then it becomes very, very unlikely that you'll be able to, get student loans, or, of course, then getting a work visa, you just have to be applying as a foreigner.
Let's look at the 2006 Citizenship Amendment Act, which ended automatic citizenship for children born here to overstayers. The first wave of these children are now young adults facing the reality of life without any documentation, and some are turning to immigration lawyers like Alistair McClymont for help.
From what I've found is that when these cases are highlighted in the media, then that tends to bring more people out of the woodwork and come forward. And that's really one of the things that I'm trying to do, because what I have seen from the kids so far is that they've basically lived their lives in hiding, and the families are very, very reluctant for them to come forward and to speak up out of fear. So it is actually really difficult to bring these people out of the woodwork. But, some of them are contacting community leaders, some of them are contacting some of the media outlets, and some of them are contacting us directly. So, yes, it is bringing kids out.
And the cases, are they all pretty similar? You say that they've been living their lives in hiding. So they haven't been going to school, they don't go to the doctor, they don't do all the things?
Well, no, they are able to attend school, and the Ministry of Education initiated a system where the schools could apply to the ministry for permission for a child to attend school despite not having the correct visa. So that is there. Some families are taking advantage of that, but some families are still unaware that right exists. So they are keeping their kids at home. But education is only one part of the puzzle. There's also the healthcare. All of the children tell the same story, that they're reluctant to go to the hospital, they're reluctant to go to doctors. And the difficulty now, of course, is that after the amendment in 2006, these kids, the oldest kids, are now finishing high school and have hit a brick wall in terms of their lives.
Tell me about the 2006 Citizenship Amendment Act. I mean, what was going on at the time for this law to even come into place? Well,
we can only really speculate, but at that time, there were a number of cases coming through the court system regarding the rights of New Zealand citizen children to enable overstayer parents to remain here permanently because of the overstayer children. There were cases coming through into the High Court which would suggest that these New Zealand citizen children have such strong rights that it would enable the parents to stay. And there seemed to be a bit of panic at that stage as these cases were working their way up from the High Court to the Court of Appeal to the Supreme Court. That panic seemed to then translate into Parliament rushing through a number of pieces of legislation, and the higher courts reacting with fear to what some of the lower courts were suggesting. So there were a bunch of things that all happened at around about the same time as the Citizenship Amendment Act.
This was a piece of legislation that went through under the Helen Clark government, and it had various purposes. But I'm told that partway through the legislation going through Parliament, an amendment was added into it to look at this issue of parents who might be coming to New Zealand, might already be here, possibly on a temporary visa or possibly having overstayed, and have children, and what the citizenship status of their children should be.
So initially, that part of it wasn't going to be included in this Amendment Act.
Well, immigration lawyer Matt Robson, who used to be an MP for the Progressive Party, says that he was in those conversations when it happened. He recalled that the Citizenship Act had this change to birthright citizenship and that it was dropped in during later stages of the bill. He said he remembered having a stand-up argument with Helen Clark on TV about it. There were concerns about birth tourism at the time, that idea that people might come here and have their children here just to be able to give them citizenship. They call it the anchor baby, the idea that if your child had citizenship, that later on in life you might be able to get citizenship yourself, or that you would just be bestowing good privileges on them for later on. So there were concerns, on both sides of the ledger. There were concerns that there was this birth tourism, or that, there might be people taking advantage of the fact that we had rules which meant that if your child was physically born on New Zealand soil, they would automatically become New Zealand citizens. And so this legislation went through. Obviously, on the other side of the argument, people were concerned with, I suppose, the situations that we're seeing now, that you would end up with children who didn't have citizenship here but had lived here all their lives.
Birth tourism is actually a thing in the United States. There are medical facilities that are advertising birth tourism to people outside of the United States to come and have children in the United States. We can't have that here in New Zealand. When anyone applies for a visa to come, that you have to declare whether or not you're pregnant. You have to declare what your purpose of coming here is. If you're declaring that the purpose is going to come here to have a child, you're not going to be granted a temporary visa. Even if the child was a New Zealand citizen, they are unable to legally sponsor the parents until the child is 18. Even under our parent residence category, the child needs to be making a minimum income of approximately $150,000 a year for 3 years before they can even sponsor. The processing times for residence applications are looking at currently 4 to 5 years. So if you have a child that was born here as a citizen, you're going to be waiting close to a quarter of a century at best before that child is going to sponsor the parents.
When that law went through, is this what you imagined would happen? Is that, we would have potentially thousands of children going into adulthood who basically have no rights to be here?
Sharon, I actually don't think that anybody has ever put their mind to the implications of passing this law. And part of the reason for that is because other countries don't really have the same problem. So in Australia and United Kingdom, they have a birthright plus 10 years habitual residence. Canada and United States has automatic birthright. And in European countries, they have the European Convention on Human Rights, which provides a lot more protection for well-settled unlawful migrants than New Zealand. So it appears that nobody had ever thought about it, and they just assumed in 2006 that Immigration New Zealand and their compliance branch would be able to manage the immigration system in a way that nobody would become long-term overstayers. But of course, that was completely unrealistic, because we do have large numbers of overstayers here who have been here for many decades, and Immigration New Zealand simply don't have the capacity to locate those people and to deport them before they have children who then grow up. So I think that it just slipped through the gaps. Nobody ever considered it. I do see that initially when the law was passed, both the Ministry of Social Development and the Children's Commissioner were writing reports to the government indicating that there were issues not only with this, but with the reservations that the New Zealand government had regarding the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. But those concerns just seem to fade out and die around about 2009, shortly after the change of government, the John Key-led national government, and nobody seemed to ever think about it or talk about it again.
It did come across Phil Twyford's desk a few years ago, though, and I'm just wondering why they didn't do something about that then.
Well, yeah, that's really interesting. I haven't come across anything after around about 2009, but you remember we had 6 years of a Labor-led government which made the rights of vulnerable and innocent children a priority. So it seems quite incredible that they didn't investigate this further and do something about it then, because I noticed last week that Phil Twyford's come out and said, well, this is a serious problem, but they didn't do anything for 6 years either.
When did you first come across these stories?
It was only really recently, and even though I've been doing this work for a quarter century or more, it never really occurred to me that this would actually be a problem. And it was only when these children started coming forward that I thought, this is really unusual. I wonder how many other children are in this sort of situation, and then started looking into it and investigating and realizing the extent of the problem. But for me, it's only quite a recent thing. And I think that is because it's these children are now finishing high school and realizing that their life has now come to an end, that they don't have any other options as to what to do.
And you just feel like you're stuck. There's no options, there's no pathway to be able to do something in my life.
And I think that that's the reason why this is now becoming an issue publicly. People are talking about it. The media are taking an interest in it because it's that first cohort of children who are finishing high school who are now coming out.
And there's that other weird situation in that this particular child has no status, but they might have an older sibling born before 2006 who has all the rights of a New Zealand citizen.
Yep, so the recent family that were in the news last week, there were 5 children. The 3 older sisters were all born as New Zealand citizens, and the 2 younger brothers were born after 1st of January 2006 and are here unlawfully and living in fear of being deported to a foreign country.
Here's Stuff's Steve Kilgallen with that story.
Ben is in the first wave of affected children now becoming adults. His younger brother is also impacted. His sister Sarah, born 4 years earlier, is a citizen.
When mentioning that we're going overseas for a little girls' trip, my younger brothers were like, oh, I want to come. But then they would whisper underneath their breath saying that, oh, I can't because I have no passport. Yeah, it really did break my heart hearing them say that.
It's a really unusual situation when you have the 3 older siblings can get on with their lives. They can study, they can work, they can have families, they can do all of these things, while the 2 younger brothers have got nothing and are living in fear. So I would imagine that there'll be many families in such a situation.
And there'll continue to be children in this situation because it's all happened since 2006.
Yep, well, that's right, because 2006, which is 19 years ago. So every year now we're going to be having more and more of these children are going to be coming out of high school and realizing that they can't go for tertiary study, they can't go and get jobs because employers, it would be a breach of the law for employers to employ someone who's here unlawfully. So they can't work, they can't study, they can't travel, they just simply cannot do anything.
What's been the response of the relevant ministers?
Well, the Green Party have already adopted a change in the birthright citizenship laws as one of their immigration policies. In the news media, Phil Twyford, as the Labour opposition spokesman, expressed an interest to look into this further. Brooke Finn-Velden, as the Minister of Internal Affairs, has just dismissed it out of hand. She didn't even seem to read the letter I sent her. And I've had pretty much silence from everybody else. No one from the national-led government has responded at all to the concerns that I've raised directly with them. And really, it's hard to consider what the justification is for punishing these children. Nobody has made the argument that these children have done something wrong and that they deserve to be punished. The only potential argument is that these children are being punished as a deterrent for others against having children here in New Zealand, which seems a really odd thing to do, that we're going to sacrifice the lives of young innocent children as a deterrent for other people having children. It's just unfathomable that as a society we can actually do this to children and use them for this purpose. There really doesn't seem to be any moral justification whatsoever for treating them so badly.
And of course, as you say, every year it's going to be thousands more and thousands more and thousands more.
Yeah, it's just going to get a bigger and bigger problem as these children come out of the education system and want to move on with their lives. And of course, some of these children may not even realize that there's a problem because they do go to high school if the high schools allow them to do so. They may not necessarily know what's happening with the administration, the high schools and the Ministry of Education once they do their enrolment. So they could well be going through their whole lives not actually realizing there's a difficulty. But, once they leave high school and they want to go and study or they want a job or they want to travel, that's where the problems are going to happen. And it's going to continue to happen. This is not just a one-off this year. This is going to happen year after year after year. And the problem is that Immigration New Zealand Compliance Branch, whose responsibility is to deport overstayers, they're practically speaking not going to go and pick up these kids and put them on a plane and send them to a foreign country.
Whether they have citizenship elsewhere is difficult to ascertain. If their parents had citizenship of another country, they would probably be able to get citizenship by descent in that country. Although it is feasible to be stateless, and I think that New Zealand has obligations in those circumstances to give children citizenship.
Anyone who's covered immigration, from the lawyers to the journalists, you must have known about this for a while, since the law came in 2006.
Yeah, so the problem was that obviously these people don't want to come forward because they're scared about the consequences of doing so, and they don't want to speak up either, in the media, or necessarily don't want to put their cases in front of immigration officials in case it means that they or their parents get deported. But we've known about this since 2006. We've known that these kids are going to turn 16, 18 when they need to have documents that are going to allow them to work and study and the rest of it. And so it's just been a question of trying to track those people down. And of course, Bless and Tom did a great job in getting hold of our first one, Damon Kumar, who maybe has opened the door just a crack for other people to be able to come through and make their case as well.
You obviously went into those communities that these people might be in, but nobody either knew about them or was willing to help.
Yeah, it's notoriously hard to speak to overstayers. People know them, and people know that they're, working for people without having documents. They know that they will probably be going to church with them, and they'll be probably going to school with them. But yeah, they're invisible people. And that's the very nature of it. And so it's incredibly hard for journalists to talk to them until they make that step forward and decide that they need to tell their story.
What do you want to happen, Alistair?
Well, much of our immigration policy in this country is based on best practice of what happens in similar countries, such as United Kingdom, Canada, Australia. So what I am asking the government to do is to look at the citizenship laws in both the United Kingdom and Australia, which doesn't have automatic birthright citizenship, but it does kick in after a period of 10 years of habitual residence. That seems to be the best practice, because what it does is it recognises the fact that once children hit that 10-year mark, they really become part of the wider community, and the wider community has significant interest in those children being a part of the community. In a short-term measure, something urgently needs to be done about these kids who are out there and in the shadows, who are now finishing high school and have nowhere to go. What do we do? Do we just ignore these kids and just leave them to wallow at home by themselves without any right to work or study or to live their lives? Because Immigration New Zealand Compliance Branch, I don't believe, are actually going to go out and arrest and deport these kids and send them to another country. They've got more moral sensibilities than that. And I think the easiest way of mopping those kids up and doing something to help them is through the Minister of Immigration, who has the ability to create policy which can work as a one-off to enable that cohort of children who have been living here more than 10 years to obtain resident visas and get on with their lives.
The The Internal Affairs Minister, Brooke Van Velden, says she has no plans to change the rules on citizenship. That's the detail for today, thanks to Jill Bonnet and Alistair McClymont. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and NZ On Air. Today's podcast was produced by Gwen McClure and engineered by Jeremy Veal. I'm Sharon Brett Kelly. Ka kite anō.